Elena sat at her desk, the late afternoon light spilling through the blinds in thin, golden slats across her notebook. The room smelled faintly of lavender, a scent she'd chosen years ago to calm her client's ironic. Now, how it did nothing for the knot tightening in her chest. She tapped her pen against the page, a staccato rhythm that matched the pulse in her temples. The last client of the day had left an hour ago, a young man unraveling over a breakup, his voice still echoing in her mind. How do you know when it's real? She'd given him her practiced answer, something about communication, vulnerability, but now, alone, the question gnawed at her. Her phone buzzed on the desk, screen lighting up with Mark's name. She hesitated before picking it up, her thumb hovering over the notification. It was just a text, running late again. Big project. Dinner at 8. She stared at it, the words blurring into something more than a casual update. Lately, his late nights had piled up like unanswered questions, 3 this week alone. She typed back, "Okay, see you then," and set the phone down, but her eyes lingered on it. Mark's phone. That sleek, black rectangle he guarded like a second heart. She'd never snooped. Therapists don't snoop, she told herself. They analyze, they observe. But last night, half asleep on the couch, she'd seen it light up on the coffee table. A name she didn't recognize, Sophie. The message preview had been brief, "Missed you today." No context, no explanation. She'd frozen, the TV's muted chatter filling the silence, and when Mark stumbled in at midnight, smelling faintly of gin, she'd said nothing. Now, in the stillness of her office, Elena replayed that moment. Sophie. A colleague. A friend. She didn't know a Sophie. Mark's architecture firm was a maze of names she'd never bothered to memorize. Junior designers, clients, the odd intern. But "Missed you" felt personal, intimate. Her mind spun a web. Sophie with sharp cheekbones and a laugh that turned heads. Sophie leaning over blueprints with Mark, their hands brushing. She shook her head, disgusted with herself. This was projection, pure and simple. Her mother's voice crept in, unbidden. "Men don't change, Elena. They just get better at hiding it." She stood abruptly, shoving the chair back with a scrape, and crossed to the window. Camden buzzed below, cyclists weaving through traffic, a busker strumming a guitar. Their flat was just a 10-minute walk from here, a third-floor haven they'd filled with art and books and promises. 10 years married, 12 together. She'd always trusted Mark's easy charm, the way he'd sketch her profile on napkins during dinner dates, the way he'd pull her close in the dark. But trust, she knew, was a fragile thing, glass pretending to be stone. The clock ticked toward 6. She grabbed her coat and bag, locking the office behind her. The air outside was crisp, March biting at her knuckles as she walked home. She needed to see him, to read his face. Dinner at 8 gave her time to think or overthink, as Mark would tease. She stopped at a corner shop, picking up a bottle of red wine, something to soften the edges of whatever conversation awaited. Their flat greeted her with its usual warmth, exposed brick, a sagging bookshelf, the faint hum of the radiator. She set the wine on the counter and kicked off her shoes, padding to the living room. Mark's jacket hung over the armchair, a careless habit she'd stopped nagging him about. She ran her fingers over it, then paused. His phone was in the pocket. She could feel its weight. Her breath caught. This wasn't her. She didn't do this. But her hand moved anyway, slipping inside, pulling it out. The screen was locked, of course. She knew his passcode, his sister's birthday, 0419, but hesitated. What was she looking for? Proof. Absolution. She typed it in, the click of each number loud in her ears. The home screen flared to life, apps, a photo of them in Paris last summer, her smiling, him kissing her cheek. She opened the messages. There it was, Sophie. 3 texts since yesterday. Missed you today. Then, lunch tomorrow. And this morning, you're terrible at hiding it, you know. Elena's stomach dropped. Hiding what? She scrolled up, but the thread was short, starting only a week ago. No replies from Mark, just those 3 messages, dangling like bait. The front door clicked open. She fumbled the phone, shoving it back into the jacket as Mark's voice called out, "Elena, you home?" Her heart hammered. He wasn't supposed to be here yet. She stepped into the kitchen, forcing a smile as he appeared in the doorway, tall, disheveled, his tie loosened. "Thought you said 8, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Project wrapped early. Miracle, right?" He grinned, dropping his bag by the counter. "Wine already? Rough day." She nodded, watching him. His eyes flicked to the jacket, then back to her. Did he know? Could he tell? "Just tired," she said. "You?" "Exhausted." He moved past her, brushing her shoulder, and poured two glasses. To surviving Monday, he toasted, clinking hers. She sipped, the wine bitter on her tongue. Surviving. Yes, she thought. But surviving what? Elena watched Mark over the rim of her glass, the wine's deep red catching the light from the pendant lamp above the counter. He leaned against the sink, swirling his own glass absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed somewhere past her out the window, maybe, or lost in a thought she couldn't reach. She wanted to ask about Sophie right then, to let the name spill out like a dropped plate, shattering the quiet between them. But she didn't. Not yet. She'd spent years teaching clients to sit with discomfort, to let it breathe before acting. Now she had to take her own advice. "You're quiet," Mark said, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, a probing she recognized. He'd always been good at reading her, or at least pretending to. "Long day," she replied, setting her glass down. "Lots of listening." He nodded, stepping closer to slide an arm around her waist. "You're too good at that. Ever think about turning it off?" His breath was warm against her temple, and for a moment, she leaned into him, the familiar weight of his touch pulling her back to a time when trust wasn't a question. But the phone in his jacket loomed in her peripheral vision, a silent accusation. "Hard to turn off what pays the bills," she said, forcing a laugh. She slipped out of his grasp to grab the bottle, refilling her glass. "How's the project going? You've been buried in it." Mark shrugged, running a hand through his hair, dark, slightly graying at the temples, a detail she'd once found charming. "It's a beast. Client keeps changing their mind. Sophie's been a lifesaver, though keeps the team sane." There it was. Sophie dropped into the conversation like a pebble into still water, rippling outward. Elena's grip tightened on the bottle, but she kept her face neutral, trained by years of practice. "Sophie?" she asked, tilting her head as if the name were new, a curiosity rather than a dagger. "Yeah, the new designer. Started a few months back. Sharp as hell, saved my ass on the renders last week." He took a sip of wine, oblivious or pretending to be to the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders stiffened. "Sounds like a keeper," Elena said, her tone light but her mind racing. "Missed you today. You're terrible at hiding it." The texts replayed in her head, each word a puzzle piece she couldn't yet fit together. "You've never mentioned her." Mark frowned, just for a second, before his grin returned. "Haven't I? Guess I've been too fried to keep you updated on the office soap opera." He moved to the fridge, pulling out a block of cheddar and a knife. "Want some?" "I'm starving." She nodded, watching as he sliced the cheese with quick, precise movements, architect's hands, steady and sure. She wondered if those hands had touched Sophie, if they'd lingered over blueprints or something more. The thought made her stomach twist, not with anger but with a strange, hollow ache. She hated this version of herself, the one that doubted, that dissected every glance and pause. But she couldn't stop. Dinner passed in a blur of small talk, his day, her clients, the neighbor's yappy dog. She played her part, smiling when he laughed, nodding when he ranted about budget cuts. But her mind was elsewhere, spinning scenarios. Sophie texting him late at night. Sophie laughing at his dry humor, the kind Elena had grown used to. Sophie knowing a side of him Elena hadn't seen in years. When they finished, Mark cleared the plates and she excused herself to the bedroom, claiming a headache. She needed space, air that wasn't thick with unspoken questions. The room was dim, the bed unmade from that morning, a rare lapse in her need for order. She sank onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling, her pulse loud in her ears. Her mother's divorce had been a slow bleed, not a sudden break. Elena was 16 when she'd found the letters, crisp envelopes tucked in her father's desk, scented with perfume that wasn't her mother's. She'd read them in secret, each word a betrayal. "I can't wait to see you again. She doesn't understand me like you do." Her mother had known, somehow, long before the truth came out. "It's in the silences," she'd told Elena years later, over tea gone cold. "You feel it before you see it." Was that what this was? A silence she'd ignored. Mark wasn't her father, charming but weak, chasing validation in every new face. Mark was solid, or so she'd thought. But the texts, the late nights, the way he brushed off Sophie's name, they gnawed at her. She heard him in the living room, the TV flickering on, a low murmur of voices. She could confront him now, demand answers. But what if he lied? Worse, what if he didn't? She needed more evidence, not just suspicion. Her therapist brain kicked in, gather data, observe patterns. Don't react impulsively. Her human heart, though, screamed something else. Find out now, or it'll eat you alive. The next morning, Mark left early, kissing her forehead as she pretended to sleep. She waited until the door clicked shut before springing up, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. His jacket still hung over the chair. She checked the pocket empty. He'd taken the phone. Of course he had. She cursed herself for not looking more last night, for letting fear paralyze her. Her day was light to clients, then paperwork. She could have left it there, let the doubt fester quietly. But instead, she canceled her afternoon, texting her assistant some vague excuse about a migraine. She needed to know. Mark's office was in Shoreditch, a sleek glass building she'd visited once for a holiday party. She'd never gone unannounced, why would she? But now, she pulled on her coat, grabbed her keys, and headed out, the tube bright a haze of rattling tracks and her own racing thoughts. She didn't have a plan, not really. Just a need to see, to catch him off guard. The lobby was all polished concrete and minimalist art, a receptionist tapping away at a desk. "I'm here to see Mark Holloway," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "His wife. Surprise visit." The receptionist smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing in Elena's chest. "He's upstairs, 3rd floor. Want me to buzz him?" "No," Elena said quickly. "I'll just head up." "Thanks." The elevator hummed, each second stretching into eternity. When the doors opened, she stepped into a bustle of activity, drafting tables, laptops, voices overlapping. She spotted Mark near a window, leaning over a desk, his laugh cutting through the noise. And there, beside him, was a woman, tall, dark-haired, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she pointed at a screen. Sophie, Elena thought, her breath catching. It had to be. The way Mark tilted toward her, the ease in his posture, it was intimate, undeniable. Elena stood frozen, unnoticed, as the room spun around her. She'd come for answers, but now, watching them, she wasn't sure she could handle what they'd reveal. Elena's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, rooted to the polished floor of the open-plan office as Mark's laugh echoed across the space. The woman Sophie, it had to be Sophie, tilted her head toward him, her dark hair spilling over one shoulder, a smile playing on her lips. Elena's chest tightened, a vice squeezing out the air. She'd come here for clarity, but this tableau of casual intimacy was a fog she couldn't see through. Was it flirtation? Friendship? Something more? Her therapist's mind demanded context, evidence her wife's heart saw only betrayal. Mark straightened, his hand brushing Sophie's as he handed her a pen. A small gesture, meaningless in isolation, but to Elena, it was a spark igniting a pile of dry leaves. She could march over, interrupt them, demand an explanation in front of his colleagues. She imagined the scene, his startled expression, her voice cutting through the hum of the office, the satisfaction of watching him squirm. But her feet wouldn't move. Fear, or maybe shame, held her back. Fear of being wrong, shame at being the kind of woman who'd stalk her husband at work. Someone brushed past her, a junior designer with a stack of blueprints, muttering an apology. The motion jolted her, and she turned, retreating to the elevator before Mark could spot her. The doors slid shut, sealing her in with her reflection pale, wide-eyed, a stranger staring back. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, breathing hard. What was she doing? This wasn't her. She didn't spy, didn't skulk. She fixed people's messes, not her own. Back on the street, the Shoreditch air hit her like a slap damp, tinged with exhaust and the faint tang of coffee from a nearby cough. She walked without direction, her coat flapping open, the cold seeping into her bones. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she yanked it out, half expecting Mark's name. It was her friend Claire. Lunch tomorrow. Miss your face. Elena typed a quick yes, 1 p.m., and shoved the phone back, her thoughts detangled for small talk. She replayed the scene in her head, Mark's ease, Sophie's touch. It wasn't proof, not really. People worked closely in offices, they laughed, they collaborated. But the texts "missed you today, you're terrible at hiding it" cast everything in shadow. Hiding what? An affair, a crush, a lie. She needed more than glimpses and gut feelings. She needed to know. By the time she reached the tube, a plan was forming, fragile but deliberate. Mark's phone was the key. He'd taken it today, but he wouldn't always. He was careless sometimes, leaving it on the counter while he showered or scrolled through it half asleep on the couch. She'd wait, watch, find a moment. And if that failed, there were other ways: his laptop, his emails, the receipts he tossed in the kitchen drawer. She hated herself for it, this descent into paranoia, but the alternative, blind trust, was a luxury she couldn't afford. At home, she poured another glass of wine, the bottle half empty now, and sat at the kitchen table with her notebook. She flipped to a blank page, her pen hovering. She'd treated clients like this, spouses consumed by suspicion, their marriages crumbling under the weight of what if. She'd told them to confront, to communicate, but she couldn't follow her own script. Instead, she wrote timeline. Below it, she jotted dates, Mark's late nights over the past month, the first time he'd mentioned Sophie, had he? She couldn't recall the text she'd seen. It was thin, a skeleton of doubt, but it gave her something to hold on to. Mark came home at 7, his tie gone, his sleeves rolled up. "You're still up," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Headache better." "Mostly," she lied, closing the notebook. "How was your day?" "Long, Sophie, and I finally cracked the client's latest tantrum, redesigning half the lobby in a day. She's a genius." He grinned, heading to the fridge. "Beer." Elena nodded, her throat dry. There it was again, Sophie, slipping into his words like she belonged there. "She sounds impressive," she said, keeping her tone even. "You two work well together." "Yeah, she gets it, cuts through the bullshit. Makes my life easier." He popped the cap off a bottle and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. "You okay? You look off." "Just tired," she said, forcing a smile. "Early night, maybe." He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Fair enough. I've got some emails to finish. Mind if I crash on the couch later?" "Go ahead." She stood, taking the beer and her notebook to the bedroom. Emails. Another thread to pull. She waited until she heard the TV flick on, then opened her laptop, her fingers trembling slightly as she logged into their shared cloud account. Mark used it for work backups, sometimes plans, invoices, nothing personal. But maybe there'd be something. She scrolled through folders, project files, tax documents, a few blurry photos from their last holiday. Nothing stood out. Then, in a subfolder labeled MISC, she found it, a PDF receipt from a hotel in Bloomsbury, dated 2 weeks ago. £180 for one night. Mark had said he'd been at a client dinner that evening, home by midnight. She stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. It could be innocent, a work expense, a mix-up. But her gut whispered otherwise. She closed the laptop, her breath shallow. The hotel was a lead, but she couldn't call, couldn't ask without tipping her hand. She needed his phone texts, call logs, something concrete. Tomorrow, she decided. He'd shower in the morning, she'd check then. Sleep eluded her that night, the beer untouched on the nightstand. When Mark slipped into bed at 2, his arm draping over her waist, she lay still, pretending to be asleep. His breathing evened out, steady and untroubled, while hers stayed jagged, caught in the web of her thoughts. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the curtains. Mark stirred, groaning as he rolled out of bed. "Coffee," he mumbled, already shuffling toward the bathroom. "Sure," she called, waiting until the shower hissed to life. His phone was on the dresser, she'd seen him plug it in last night. She crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the rug, and picked it up. Passcode 0419. The screen unlocked. She opened the messages first. Sophie's thread was there, longer now. "Lunch tomorrow." Had a reply, "Yeah, 12:30. Usual spot." Then, "Last night, you're killing me with this project. Drinks after?" Mark's response, "Can't tonight, ease off." "Soon." Elena's stomach lurched. "Ease off." Her. He was scheduling around her. She scrolled further, her thumb shaking. "A week back. That was too close today. Careful." "Mark, I know. Won't happen again." "Too close." "What?" Her pulse roared in her ears. She flicked to his call log, Sophie's number, 3 calls last week, all under 5 minutes. Then, buried deeper, a call 2 weeks ago, the same night as the hotel receipt. 15 minutes. The shower stopped. She locked the phone, placing it back exactly as it was, and darted to the bed, pulling the covers up as Mark emerged, towel around his waist. "Coffee's on," he said, oblivious. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said, her voice tight. He didn't notice, humming as he dressed. She watched him, this man she'd loved for over a decade, now a stranger hiding in plain sight. When he left for work, she sat at the kitchen table, the coffee cold in her mug. The hotel, the texts, the calls, it was a map, incomplete but damning. She could confront him now, but the pieces weren't all there. She needed the full picture, even if it broke her. Tomorrow, she'd meet Claire for lunch. Claire knew Mark, knew their life. Maybe she'd seen something Elena hadn't. Maybe she could help. But for now, Elena sat alone, the silence louder than ever, plotting her next step in a game she'd never wanted to play. The rest of the morning passed in a haze, Elena moving through her routine like a ghost, showering, dressing, sipping coffee that tasted like ash. Her office felt smaller today, the lavender scent cloying instead of soothing. She had one client scheduled, a new one, before lunch with Claire. She considered canceling, but the distraction might steady her, keep her from spiraling further into the quicksand of her thoughts. Her client arrived at 10, a woman in her early 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes red-rimmed from crying or sleeplessness or both. Her name was Rachel, and she sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. "It's my husband. I think I know he's cheating." Elena's pen froze mid-air, the irony slicing through her like a blade. She forced her hand to move, jotting Rachel suspects infidelity in her notebook, her own pulse thudding in her ears. "Take your time," she said, the words automatic. "What makes you think that?" Rachel's story spilled out in fragments: late nights at the office, a sudden interest in his appearance, a password change on his phone. "He says I'm paranoid," she whispered, "but I found a receipt, dinner for two, someplace we've never been. He swore it was a client, but I don't believe him." Her eyes searched Elena's, desperate for validation. "Am I crazy?" Elena swallowed, her throat dry. She saw herself in Rachel, the doubt, the need to be right and wrong at once. "You're not crazy," she said, her voice softer than intended. "Trust your instincts, but don't let them run away with you. Have you talked to him?" Rachel shook her head. "I'm scared of what he'll say. What if he lies? Or worse, what if he doesn't?" She crumbled the tissue, tears spilling over. "I just want to know, but I don't know how to find out without losing myself." The session stretched beyond its hour, Rachel's words a mirror Elena couldn't escape. She offered strategies, open communication, setting boundaries, but they felt hollow, a script she couldn't follow herself. When Rachel left, thanking her with a shaky smile, Elena stayed at her desk, staring at the notes. "Trust your instincts." She'd said it, but could she do it? Her instincts screamed that Mark was hiding something. Sophie, the hotel, the texts, but instincts weren't proof. She needed more. Lunch with Claire was at a bistro in Islington, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Claire was already there, her blonde curls spilling over a red scarf, waving as Elena approached. "God, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, standing to hug her. "Work or Mark?" Elena managed a laugh, brittle but genuine. "Both, maybe." They sat, ordering wine and salads, the normalcy of it a lifeline. Claire had been her friend since university, blunt, loyal, the kind of person who'd call bullshit without hesitation. If anyone could cut through Elena's fog, it was her. "So spill," Claire said, sipping her Pinot Grigio. "You've got that pinched look like when you're overanalyzing everything." Elena hesitated, twirling her fork. "It's Mark. I think he might be having an affair." The words landed heavy, real now that they were out. She braced for Claire's reaction: shock, denial, a quick dismissal. Instead, Claire frowned, setting her glass down. "Shit. What makes you think that?" Elena recounted it all: the texts, the hotel receipt, the scene at his office. Her voice stayed steady, clinical, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the napkin into knots. "He's been different," she finished. "Distant. And this Sophie, she's everywhere now, in his stories, his excuses." Claire listened, her usual chatter replaced by a rare stillness. When Elena stopped, she leaned back, exhaling. "Okay. First, you're not crazy. I'd be suspicious too. Second, Mark's always been a flirt, you know that. Doesn't mean he's cheating, but it doesn't mean he isn't either." She paused, eyeing Elena. "Have you asked him?" "Not yet. I don't have enough. He'll just deny it, twist it around." Elena's salad sat untouched, the greens wilting. "You've seen him lately, dinners, drinks. Has he seemed off?" Claire chewed her lip, a habit from their student days when she was choosing her words. "Maybe. Last month, at Tom's birthday thing, he was on his phone a lot, smiling at it, you know? I thought it was work, but he didn't say. And he left early, said he had a meeting the next day. Could have been true, but..." She trailed off, shrugging. "I didn't think much of it then." Elena's stomach sank. Another thread mark on his phone, slipping away. "Did he mention Sophie?" "Not by name. Just work stuff at the team, the project. He's good at vague, isn't he?" Claire reached across, squeezing Elena's hand. "Look, I love Mark, but if he's screwing around, you deserve to know. What's your next move?" I don't know, Elena admitted. Keep digging, I guess. His phone, his laptop, something's got to give. Claire nodded, her expression hardening. Do it. And if you need backup, I'm here. Confront him when you're ready, but don't let him gaslight you. You're too smart for that. The rest of lunch blurred small talk about Claire's job, her latest fling, but Elena's mind was elsewhere, plotting. Claire's words stuck with her, he's good at vague. Mark had always had that gift, charming ambiguity, a way of dodging without seeming to. She'd loved it once, his effortless lightness. Now it felt like a weapon. Back home, she opened her laptop again, the hotel receipt still glaring from the screen. She Googled the place, Bloomsbury Boutique Hotel, a chic spot with velvet chairs and dim lighting. Not a client dinner kind of place. She scrolled reviews, then froze. A photo on their site, the bar, with a glimpse of a woman in the background, dark hair, tall, laughing. It could be anyone, but to Elena, it was Sophie. Imagination or intuition? She couldn't tell anymore. Mark texted at 5, home late, client drinks. Don't wait up. She stared at it, the lie so blatant she almost laughed. Client drinks, or Sophie. She typed back, okay, take care, and set the phone down, her resolve hardening. Tonight, she'd search his laptop properly, emails, browser history, anything he hadn't scrubbed. He'd left it in the study, plugged in by the desk. She logged in, his password was the same as ever, their anniversary, and opened his email. Hundreds of messages, most work-related, but she filtered for Sophie's name. 3 hits, project updates, nothing personal. Then, in the trash folder, a deleted email from 2 weeks ago, the hotel night. Subject, details. Body, 8 p.m., room 312. Don't be late. No signature, just a phone number. Elena cross-checked it, Sophie's, from Mark's call log. Her breath stopped. Room 312. Not a dinner, not a meeting. A room. She sank into the chair, the room spinning. It was real, tangible, undeniable. But still, her mind fought it. Maybe it was a mistake, a group thing, a misunderstanding. She needed his voice, his confession, not just paper trails. When Mark stumbled in at 11, reeking of whiskey, she was on the couch, the laptop closed, her face a mask. Good night, she asked, her tone neutral. Yeah, exhausting though, he said, kicking off his shoes. You? Quiet, she replied, watching him. He didn't meet her eyes, heading straight to bed. She stayed where she was, the email burned into her memory. Tomorrow, she'd confront him. No more shadows, she'd drag the truth into the light, whatever it cost. Elena didn't sleep. The couch became her vigil, the cushions creasing under her weight as the night stretched on, Mark's snores drifting from the bedroom like a taunt. She'd rehearsed the confrontation in her head a dozen times, calm at first, then sharp, then unraveling into whatever raw thing lay beneath. The email, 8 p.m., room 312. Don't be late sat in her mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. She'd printed it, the paper folded in her pocket, a weapon she wasn't sure she'd use. Morning broke gray and heavy, rain tapping the windows as Mark shuffled into the kitchen. She heard him before she saw him, the clink of a mug, the hiss of the kettle. She stood, smoothing her sweater, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. No more waiting. She'd spent too long in the dark. He was at the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee, when she stepped in. Mark, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. We need to talk. He glanced up, eyebrows lifting. Morning to you too. What's up? His tone was light, but his shoulders tensed, a tell she'd missed before, or maybe hadn't wanted to see. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. Who's Sophie? The spoon paused mid-stir, just for a second, before he resumed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sophie, from work. I've told you about her, designer, brilliant at her job. Why? Don't, Elena said, sharper now. Don't play dumb. I saw her texts. Missed you today. You're terrible at hiding it. What's she hiding, Mark? What are you hiding? His smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or calculation. He set the mug down, turning to face her fully. You went through my phone. His voice was low, not angry yet, but edging toward it. Yes, she admitted, no point in lying. And I found more than texts. A hotel receipt, Bloomsbury, 2 weeks ago. You said it was a client dinner. Then there's an email, room 312, 8 p.m. from her number. Explain that. Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, he said nothing, the rain's patter filling the silence. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Jesus, Elena, you're blowing this up into something it's not. Yes, I've been texting Sophie, she's a friend, we work together. The hotel. That was a team thing late night after a deadline. A few of us crashed there. Check the receipt, it's under the firm's account. Her stomach twisted. A team thing. It sounded plausible, smooth, the kind of excuse he'd sketch out like one of his blueprints. The email wasn't about a team, she said, pulling the paper from her pocket and unfolding it. She held it up, her hand steady despite the quake inside. Don't be late. Room 312. That's not a group memo, Mark. That's personal. He stared at the printout, his expression shifting shock, then a flash of something darker, cornered. Where did you get that? He asked, stepping closer. You hacked my email. Does it matter? She shot back. What matters is you're lying. I saw you with her yesterday, at your office. The way you were together, it wasn't just work. Tell me the truth, Mark. Are you sleeping with her? The question hung there, a guillotine blade waiting to fall. He exhaled sharply, turning away to grip the counter, his knuckles whitening. No, he said, his voice tight. I'm not sleeping with her. But he stopped, the word dangling, unfinished. But what? Elena pressed, stepping into the kitchen. Don't stop now. You've already got half a confession out.